Hi TAMS users, this is Matthew Weinstein, and this is the second of what's going to be a fairly lengthy series of videos covering how to do analysis in TAMS. In this video, we're going to take our first steps to analyzing how data codes are related to other data codes. And we're going to look at the simplest relationship that exists. Where do they overlap? So this video is going to take two approaches to that problem. The first is going to involve PDF and graphic files, and the second is going to involve the co-coding table. So, let's start out by looking at the question of PDFs. PDFs are interesting along with graphic files because they're two-dimensional, whereas TAMS was originally developed as a one-dimensional system of analysis, focused on text explicitly. So when I open my PDF file, I have a view of my PDF, which is a PowerPoint I did for a class of mine. And the co-coding question I want to tackle here is, what are the codes in this part here? Now, I'm actually going to undo that and click on my graphics tool, partially because the graphics tool, I can select any portion of a page. To answer the question, what codes are in this part of a page? What is the overlap of codes? All I need to do is click that tool, draw a rectangle, go all the way down there, and to find out the answer of what codes intersect with that rectangle, I just click the question mark here on the side. You can see there's an explanation in that hover over message. Let me click that. All right, I see down here, out of the 10 rows that used to be there, there are now only 4. Those are the 4 that overlap. Now, you may see only 3. This blue box, and this yellow here. But that yellow turns out to be 2 different records. One codes just the top row, and one codes both the top and second row. The yellow is a text selection code. This is an image selection code. These two here, FlogSam and FlippyFlop. Don't believe me? Well, let's walk through them. Here's the first code, and you can see it selects just that. It's a text code. Here's the second one. It selected all of that and gave it a code hello. These are totally ridiculous names, by the way. They mean nothing. Here's the third row. It's that bigger rectangle. And here's the fourth row, that small rectangle. If I want to see them all at the same time, I can just hold down Shift, click this all, and all of them are highlighted here so I can see that. To get back to all of my selected records, I just click the X down here in the search box. There we go. All 10 records are now present. All right, so that covers the first topic I wanted to get into, how you can look at a PDF and ask questions about codes in it. But that's really about looking at one spot and finding out how many codes are present. More often, your question is going to concern your project as a whole. What is the pattern of codes over the whole project? So I'm actually going to pull up my literature and science project that I used in video 1. In that video, you should go back and view it if you haven't, we created something called data codes, which we're going to use later on. And we're going to get into the topic of noise and signal. It's kind of a physics way of thinking of things, but you're going to see a whole lot of noise in a second. And I'm going to show you how to get through that noise. So, task 1. I've got a whole lot of different code sets. I've got negative code set, positive code set, data codes pulled out. I've got codes around specific themes. This is concerns about the unreality of literature. This is a This is gets at the same thing. These are two different code sets that for various reasons I recreated at different times. At any rate, there's just a whole mess of code sets there. That's all you need to know at this moment. I'm interested in co-coding. That is, when does a passage of text get coded by more than one code value? We have a report for that. This is the graph chart co-coding frequency report. And when you pick it, you get this menu. Now we're going to ignore this to start with. This will bring up a GraphViz chart of code relationships. Instead, I'm going to work with this, and I'm actually going to leave it as is, but eventually we're going to pick other code sets. Let's look at what happens when I look at all my codes, including data codes and context codes, in both directions. What I get is a whole lot of stuff. I can't even open my file on this fairly modest project. By modest, I mean, let me bring TAMS up. I mean that I have here 53 codes in that project. 53. And 53 codes, if I stretch this out a little bit more, which you can do, I'm looking at a lot of noise and a very little bit of signal. Now, take a look here. I've got some huge numbers here, 18, 18, 11, but this is a context code, so it simply is overlapping with a whole lot of stuff. That's part of my noise problem. That 18, even though it looks like signal, isn't signal at all. It's not meaningful data when I'm interested in how do my data codes relate to each other, because that's not a data code. And then there's all the zeros. I have to swim through zeros to find something significant. We're going to focus on one little significant relationship just so that you see how TAMS presents the same data over and over again in a self-consistent manner. And that's going to be the intersection of narrative, that's a data code, and negative examples of using literature. A negative example would be showing how a science fiction film is wrong, for instance. We refer to that as a negative example. So that 4 is interesting to me. And I want to be able to look at it in a whole lot of different ways. But that's some actual signal in amidst all of this noise of nothing, the zeros literally. How to deal with noise? Well, one way to deal with noise is to use fewer data codes. That's where using code sets comes in. So for instance, I could look at reasons involving sociology, that's what 4S code set refers to for me, and positive reasons for using literature. I want to know, is there any relationship between those code sets? If I click OK now, I get a much smaller, much more reasonable cross-analysis of my codes. And I can see that there is one that equity in terms of reading connects to equity. I can see that, so hopefully this isn't, learning style connects to motivation. So there is some, it's easier to get to the signal because I've gotten rid of most of my codes. All right, but here's the thing. There's still a lot of noise in this, even in this very small subset of data. So it would be better if we could just get rid of the zeros altogether. But a table will always have zeros in it. So we need some other representation to get that effect. And we have one. And that's when we use this. So to start with, let's actually look at this analysis I just did, which was reasons for using literature that involve sociological issues and positive reasons. I want the connection between these, but I want it as a dot graph. Now some of these may have similar codes in them, but we're going to connect this pool of codes to each other, and I like variable line weight myself. So, let's take a look. All right, so now I have a much simpler visual to get at my data. I've gotten rid of all of my zeros. I'm only seeing things that are actually connected to each other. I have equity in reading and that learning style and motivation, and now I can see exactly what it is. Now, I'm going to show you something very confusing, but it's still better than what we had before. And that is, I'm going to go back to all of my codes here. I want to see all of those codes, variable line weight, but we're going to do a dot graph. Now, actually, we'll do this and then I'll correct it. So notice that first it makes that table all over again, and then it presents you with this. This crazy looking graph is still cleaner than this because the zeros again are gone. Only things that have a relationship of 1 or greater are mapped out on this. So the holes in the table are clogged. Problems? Well, this very, very, very thick lines has to do not with data codes, but with context codes. So again, we've got a lot of noise here. I want to get rid of the context codes, and I can do that because I have a code set with just my data codes that I created from the first video. I want variable line weight. I'm going to do a graph, and now I still have a confusing chart, but it's much less confusing. I can actually see, for instance, what are the codes that are connected to a lot of different codes, which ones are kind of isolated, which ones are actually kind of on islands by themselves, which ones have heavier lines, meaning that they have multiple connections. That's what that variable line width did. And here, in fact, is our friend narrative connected to example negative that we saw on the table, those 4. Here they are again, much more visible, and I can zoom out here, and there's another island over there, and get a real sense of what are the hot spots and cool spots in the data. So that shows you 2 different ways to get at co-coding frequency, but it's not the only way. And we're going to go in the next video into how to get very similar data results from your results window. In fact, we'll be able to do things like break that chart up by file, or look at the data actually that is coded that way in addition to just looking at counts like we are now. But that's a task for the next video. Hope this has been helpful. Again, this is the second of many videos on data analysis in TAMS.